now call the meeting to order. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to adopt the final agenda?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the final agenda.
Thank you, Laura. Is there a second?
I will second.
Real good. Thank you, Julie. Thank you very much. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Our next order of business is to adopt the minutes from the February 15th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes of the February 15th, 2022 Planning Commission.
Very good. Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All of those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. We're now moving on to our discussion item. And it is 3.1, item 3.1, residential zoning district discussions. We have one discussion item on our agenda tonight, and it's 3.1 residential zoning. This is a continuation of our ongoing ordinance review, and the item is meant for discussion and feedback purposes only. I will now turn it over to Community and Economic Development Director Marty Dole for staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. Yes, this is a continuation of our discussion from our previous meeting. As you will recall, we had a pretty long background and information, and we had another item on that evening. So while we were able to get through a portion of the items that were part of this discussion, including some of the definitions and some information about accessory dwelling units and home occupations, we were not able to get into the balance of that agenda. So tonight we will be picking that back up and focusing on the definitions and code language and bulk regulations. So like our last meeting, I'm going to pull up our draft ordinance that was included in your packet, and we'll just kind of walk through some of the proposed changes. Again, these edits are based on the feedback we received when we discussed some of these items previously, or staff's interpretation or recollection of what that direction was. So there may or may not be some things in there that pique your eyebrows and don't sound exactly right, so feel free to jump in and let's talk about those. I will also try to purposefully pause in between each of the zoning district sections to provide for some discussion. But again, if something pops up as we're going through, feel free to jump in and talk about it. So just a little bit of a refresher, one of the items we had talked about with our zoning districts, so our R1, R2, R3, R4, LMR, was changing the purpose and scope statements to better align with our comprehensive plan. So you'll see that's one of the first edits that was made in our section 24.1 R1 low density residential. This is going to be a similar format in all of the other districts as we go through, but some of this language was cleaned up a little bit, taking out the reference to after 1950, since we are now 70 years from after 1950 didn't seem as relevant anymore. Speaking to some of the other permitted uses in this area, educational facilities, places of worship, and then I think most importantly, creating that connection to the comprehensive plan that indicates that this district applies to those properties classified as low density residential in the comp plan, which includes a density of 2.25 to 6 units per acre. So moving then down into the jurisdiction section, again, just another tie back to the comprehensive plan, indicating that these codes, these regulations will be applicable to any property designated as R1 within the city as defined by the official zoning map and guided as low density residential in the comp plan. Again, that's really intended to make that connection for future annexation property, which is not yet zoned by the city but is guided as part of the comp plan, just to give the planning commission and the city council a basis for what zoning districts they should be thinking about for any newly annexed properties. So moving down, the principal uses in the R1 district, most of them have remained unchanged. We did provide some edits. So as we had discussed previously, we did remove group homes, nursing homes, care facilities, and daycare centers from principal use, permitted principal uses. You'll find those later in this section under conditional uses. We had talked about potentially wanting to put in a minimum acreage size for things like churches or cemeteries or schools. As of now, that acre is blank. I think the the determination can be made if we think there should be a minimum acreage, and if so, then we can do some comparison and determine what that total acreage or minimum acreage should be.
Or do we know what the smallest size, similarly situated piece of property within the city is today?
I don't off the top of my head, but it would be very easy to find that information on our GIS map. So that's
And maybe we could bring that in and use that as a point of departure to say, do we like what we already have? And if so, is that smaller or larger from there? Well, obviously larger, or maybe not too large. Would we want to consider maybe a maximum size as well? I'm not sure, but just throwing the idea out there.
Yeah, and that Commissioner Vansky, chair, members of the commission, that should be some relatively easy data to pull from our GIS system. So I've made a note to include some comparison and a spreadsheet of what we have existing, so we can look at it from that context at our next meeting.
Thank you, Marty.
So moving down then into permitted accessory uses in the R1 district. Again, not a whole lot noted for change in this section. We did include a reference to section 18 of the code, which is our accessory use section that has more specific information related to detached garages, storage sheds, the setbacks, some of those bulk regulations. That also includes the 2 out of 4 clause that you'll recall we talked about back when we were talking about shoreland ordinance that allows you to only have 2 of the accessory uses of the 4 that are available. So wanted to make a reference to that section of code so folks know there are additional regulations for any of these accessory uses. And then we did amend number 2 a bit just to include an accessory storage shed or structure, taking out the specific use reference, because from a planning side, how that shed or structure is used is not necessarily relevant. It's more so the setbacks and the size of that item. And then as we had discussed previously, from a staff perspective, we would currently consider a greenhouse an accessory structure anyway. So eliminated that as a specific call out. And then we did add, pursuant to some of our discussions at our last meeting with Isaac, as he noted, the differences between accessory dwelling units and attached or accessory dwelling unit such as a mother-in-law suite in your home versus a detached separate building. We did include attached accessory dwelling unit as a permitted accessory use, and that gets to the question or the concern that was raised 2 weeks ago about whether or not we would need to be specifically reviewing any of these, included what constitutes a accessory dwelling unit within an existing structure, and that this hopefully speaks to that, allowing it as a permitted use and not requiring that additional administration.
Marty, I had a quick question. If we could just take a moment to backtrack over accessory dwelling unit ground, which in this document was item number 15 was, I think we were trying to get our hands around, yep, you passed it, with the, with no wheels. I mean, I think where we're trying to go, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we don't want somebody to just roll in a mobile home and say, this is my accessory dwelling unit. Or perhaps would we even want to consider, like, something that could be trailered, pulled behind, say, a 3/4 ton pickup truck, and have that take the wheels off and say, this is my accessory dwelling unit, I've anchored it. We might want to consider reviewing language that would say something along the lines of that it would be a unit, and try to define what that unit is, that is either currently registered or could be registered as a mobile home, manufactured home under that current definition by the state statutes on registering mobile homes.
Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, valid point. I did take that note. I will preface that the document that was included was just the document from our previous meeting, so it doesn't include any of the additional comments or changes that we had discussed.
Right,
I don't think we discussed that
I
specifically
don't
at
think
the
we
last
got to
meeting.
that
So
level of specificity on it. It struck me as I was kind of going back through that could be a clear line of demarcation. Wheels could be somewhat subjective if somebody wanted to.
for sure.
We've had the conversation about people's also fish shacks that also sometimes on wheels, and they kind of pop up and hide, and we probably wouldn't want that to become an accessory dwelling unit either.
Does the constructed on permanent foundation take that out of play?
I think that there are instances where there are mobile homes that they sort of put a cinder block foundation on, pop the wheels off, and set that down. But in fact, it's still, it's still a mobile home and has all the.
I thought maybe
Yeah.
constructed meant like slab on grade.
Right,
Yeah.
Like it has to be constructed there.
yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, I get.
Yeah, I think I get the intent, and I think that's staff's intent too, right? I think we understand what the structure is, that we don't want campers, we don't want ice houses, we don't want, wheel shanty type structures. Yeah. So I think we understand the intent, and we'll look at the language, how we can better clarify to that intent. So.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And again, just because we moved back up to these sections, we are intending at a future meeting that we'll incorporate the discussion and some of the changes that were talked about in these sections, and then bring these sections back again. So I think we left off at conditional uses in R1. So again, these are those previously permitted uses that we had talked about in our last discussion on these items, that we thought maybe wouldn't necessarily be the best land use as a permitted use, just outright in an R1 district, but could potentially make sense depending on location and the project. So we have moved those to the conditional use category. That includes those group homes, nursing homes, care facilities, and a principal daycare facility. So like a standalone daycare center as a conditional use that would require an additional process and review. We also did amend the, excuse me, accessory dwelling unit for conditional use to be specifically a detached accessory dwelling unit, being conditional, as a attached, as was noted, would be considered a permitted use. Any additional questions related to the land uses before we jump into some of the bulk regulation items? All right. So moving into our bulk regulations table, obviously the principal use within R1, if we want to call it that, is single-family homes. That's what a majority of our R1 development is. So what is included here is the existing code language, because rather than making some suggestions for any changes or amendments or ideas on this, I thought it would be good to have the commission, just from a general philosophy standpoint, discuss some of these regulations, whether we think they are still adequate, should be the same, should be looked at to be amended. The one that I will specifically call out, again, and all of these open for discussion, but is the minimum finished floor area of 1,800 square feet. That is one of the areas that some of these builder groups that are coming after some of the city's zoning regulations are really taking a focus on, is that cities are requiring these larger homes, a minimum square footage for these homes in these areas. So that may be one that should be looked at, if that's still adequate, or if that minimum square floor area should be lower, or if it's needed at all. And I think before we move on into some of those other bulk regulations, I think maybe just pausing to have some discussion on some of these in the R1 district.
So finished floor area, that's gonna be first floor. That's no assumptions of a second floor. So the total square footage could be more than 1,800 square feet.
And again, this is a minimum, so our code is requiring a minimum finished floor area of 1,800 square feet.
Doesn't seem unreasonable.
I agree.
Well, I guess maybe the question is do we have a sense of what we've allowed built in the non-PUD areas where there have been lots that have been filled in because people have, said, I'm finally going to sell the double lot that I've had. And these, maybe look at what was constructed in the last 5 years. I would imagine that every one of those is probably north of 1,800 square feet. So that seems to then be the general character of the community as it exists today and has existed. That could potentially be the support for this 1,800 square foot minimum. And I guess the places that would otherwise look is some of the older areas of the city and finding a determination of what square footage we have there. I don't necessarily want to see you guys have to go pull down a bunch of the property tax data from the county to figure out what kind of square footage we have. But, if you're looking for sort of cover or justification why we have that number, you have the data to support it, say this is what we have, and we're just maintaining something consistent with what already the existing housing stock is.
Yeah, Commissioner Avansky, Chair, members of the commission, that's fair and that's valid. And again, the only reason I draw that one specifically to the commission's attention is because it does seem to be one of those areas that's drawing some of the attention for some of these groups looking to reduce or eliminate some of the city's ability to have some of these zoning regulations. And again, the argument is that cities are requiring us to build these large houses. I think we all know that if this minimum finished floor area either was, 800 square feet or didn't exist at all, that likely we're not getting any smaller homes being built in some of these developments than we would anyway. So for Victoria's at least recent and current practical standpoint, I don't think it ever really comes into play. I don't know that any developers are even looking at that, but it is one of those arguments against cities not allowing affordable housing, is having some larger minimum floor area. So again, that's the only reason I bring it to your attention.
But wouldn't affordable housing or housing with a smaller footprint be in a different designated area, not R1? Because this is 2.25 to 6. If you have 6 units per acre and you didn't have 1,800 square foot footprint at the price of the land, it wouldn't work anyway. So it seems like, we don't really have to say it, agreed, because how could they afford the land and build something for 1,000 square foot footprint unless they're charging $500,000 for it, which they probably couldn't do. So it's kind of like, unless times changed quite a bit.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. But do we do minimum finished floor areas? I think it just needs to align with our other zoning codes, like when we go down the list, that they make sense.
And that is one of the things, if you looked through some of these prior to the meeting, in the rewritten R3 district, we took that concept of that and actually have written in, and this will be a point of discussion, a maximum finished floor area for single-family homes in a higher density use. So again, if we were to go down a route like that, I think that speaks to that. But I think I'm hearing in general that we're pretty comfortable with the minimum finished floor area in the R1 district.
I am just curious how you came up with that number.
That number, I didn't. That's been in the code for 1,000 years, so I couldn't tell you where or who decided. My guess is that was probably the standard zoning code back when everybody in the world adopted their zoning codes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, Marty, if you feel there's a risk that it could be something that could be contentious, I think the economics speak for themselves. Like, you could bring that number down to 1,500. You could bring it down to 1,100. You probably can't build for $100 a square foot.
Never can
So
do it.
you're even at $100 a square foot, you're talking $180,000, which is probably on the order of $200,000 under the median home price county to begin with at this point. So the practically speaking, if you want to fend off any criticism, you can bring the number down. The economics just will drive the outcome that we will have a finished square foot or floor space well north of whatever our minimum is. We can put.
If you go smaller, there's no economies of scale. You still have to have a kitchen, you still have to have restrooms, you still have to have plumbing,
Well, and if we put 1,500 and somebody wanted to build a 1,500 square foot 4-plate house and we had lots of land in that development, would anybody complain?
Right.
No.
Right, and this would be something that would not even be in a development, correct? I mean, because the
Well, it'd be
development
in
would probably
R1.
be a planned unit development, and then
Most
Well, if
likely.
it complied with R1, then it wouldn't have to be a PUD. Our goal is to stop having everything be a PUD, I think, right? Like they can comply for a change.
I mean, I think that is a goal. I don't know if it's necessarily, but it, again, I think that's part of the planning policy decisions of the, planning commission and the city council as we look at this, right? If we take a step up about 50,000 feet from the weeds that we're in right now is, if we are looking to try to encourage, developers to meet R1 zoning, then I think the considerations need to be, do we need to reduce our R1 zoning regulations to be able to get people to meet that? Or do we need to be firmer on how we're giving out PUDs and at the risk of maybe a development not going through if it's not meeting that economy of scale again. So I think that's coming up to the stratosphere again, looking at it from that angle, what our charge is, right?
I have a question. So we're kind of looking at this now, but we have all these developments that have been approved with 7.5 foot side setback. Like, what's the legalities of saying we did all these, but now we're gonna draw a line in the sand and say 10 foot? Like, how does that work?
Commissioner Murray, chair, members of the commission, those being PUDs, they all have their own PUD ordinance adopted. So every time one of those goes through an ordinance, a PUD ordinance for that development is adopted as part of the final plat process with the council. And then that becomes the governing, it's essentially written as an amendment to the zoning ordinance for that development is how the mechanics of it works.
So it would be okay.
Yeah, I don't anticipate, I think if all of a sudden the city's stance was, we don't want to do PUD anymore and we only want R1, standard R1. Again, I don't know that there's legalities related to that. I don't think there's risk related to that from a legal standpoint, but it does change the dynamic of development in the city. So I think that's the perspective to think of it from.
Well, certainly what a bulk of the developers are doing is they're squeezing the accumulative effect on the side margin and on front and back margin to get as large a home, as pricey a home at the same time that they can. And so it would seem as though, quite frankly, they're just fine with that. 1,800 is not too large. That would be their preference, it would seem to me. On some of the, probably the most recent development off of 78th. And, they were trying to squeeze in. We really do have to have one more home in order to make this financially work. So, I don't think the developers are gonna come back and debate the issue.
I would say that if it would eliminate the argument from the developers to take the number down to 1,500 square foot, I would have no problem with that, because I think the economics are going to direct what's built anyway.
And maybe that does allow for affordable housing in a unique situation by doing that. Certainly, there's a lot of design standards that would guide them to still produce a beautiful home.
It's the 6 units on an acre. That's why they're not going to probably do it. They'd need to go to a different number to make that work. But I would be okay with it. Whatever works for.
Yeah, and again, I think for all intents and purposes, as we know, as you know, as the planning commission and seeing these developments come through, we're very rarely, if ever, dealing with a standard zoning application. So we're dealing with these from a PUD standpoint. So if someone were to come in with a PUD and saying, hey, I want to do smaller lots, but I'm going to do smaller homes on it, right? That can also be accomplished through that PUD, and say, okay, you can. So, from 1,800 to 1,500, I don't know that that's a necessary change to make, just for the sake of making a change, so.
And maybe if the code had more options and made more sense from the beginning, that number doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have the medium density, really.
Right, and that may be addressed, I mean, what we're talking about right now may be addressed in the amended or proposed amended R3 district, so it may be a moot point, anyway. Before I move on from this, and again, this doesn't have to be your final decision, but just kind of gut check on the planning commission. Are we comfortable with the current regulations for a single family home in R1, the setbacks and the sizes and the lot widths? Do we think those are still adequate and where we want to be?
I'm comfortable with it, but what point does it make? I mean, you just said nobody's come in and done a stock R1 in how long? I mean, I've been somewhat involved in 3 years, and I don't remember seeing a minimum lot bigger than 10,000 square feet and nothing under, I think it was 8 feet side yard setbacks. Maybe we had some 9s. I'm fine with it, but no one's going to deal with it. And I think if there's a push for more affordable housing, not just affordable housing, maybe R1 should be a little smaller, even though I'm the big side yard setback guy.
I think the side yard setback, we get a lot. The impervious surface, we've been going to 50%. Those numbers have, and I think that we know that with these numbers, they're going to go through a PUD process because of the cost of land. So we haven't seen anything that's complied with everything since I've been here for the year. So, and that's okay. That gives us the opportunity as a commission to look at the project in totality and make suggestions on the sketch plat and then going forward. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I think as a commission, it also makes sense to say, we do not want side yard setbacks lower than 7.5 feet. If they start coming in with 6, this is not something we should be approving. And the same thing with if they want their impervious surface to be 75%, there'll be no green space. You know, those are things that we are here to protect against. So I think we do need to.
Yeah, and Commissioner Murray, Chair, members of the commission, staff has gotten a relatively good sense of where this commission and the city council is on those things. So we typically advise folks when they're coming to a staff level that, you know, if you propose 8 by 8, you're gonna probably get scolded, and there's gonna be some discussion, but there's no way in hell that anything less than 8 is gonna get by. So we, you know, some of that we handle from a staff perspective too, when these things come in and PUDs, and just based on how we anticipate the commission or the council is gonna react to some of those things too, so.
Is there any advantage to reducing these numbers in your expert opinion?
You know, the only thing I've thought about, and I don't know that this is a good idea or a bad idea or a neutral idea, but my thought was if 10-foot side yard setbacks was really a big priority and we wanted to try and get back to that, can you contemplate reducing lot size and lot width to, you know, something more comparable to what we're seeing, but keep the side yard setbacks at 10 feet? So you've potentially got someone coming in and saying, well, you can meet standard zoning if you just give the 10 foot on each side. But again, that's just been kind of the things that keep me up at night and the gears turning. And
I think from a business standpoint, here's our standards. We can talk about it. And I think that's essentially what you're saying at the same time. And I think that's a good approach.
But I think the builders are looking to build a bigger footprint or a decent footprint on a smaller lot. They're trying to squeeze that 18 or 2,000 square feet into a smaller lot so they can build an extra house.
Yep.
Or something like that. You know, and that's where you get into the side yard setbacks and the lot sizes. You know, the minimum lot width. I mean, yeah, you could say, okay, we dropped that, but we want a 10-foot yard side setback. Well, then they're just making the houses smaller, so that doesn't really work. You know, and if you say I want 90-foot, you know, widths, or 85 feet, then they can't, the numbers don't work for them. And that's where, you know, until we either say this is what we want, or everybody else says this is what we want, whether, you know, other cities, they don't have a choice in order to redo their floor plans and redo their, but they're taking these same houses to every city, whether it's Chanhassen, Waconia, Lakeville, Woodbury, and duplicating them wherever they can duplicate them. And that's where you get into the side yards. But I agree that even if you sat there and said the side yard setback's 8 feet, is that still gonna make it, keep it from a PUD? Probably not.
yeah, you know, again, if the goal was to not do PUD, which I don't know that that's necessarily the goal we want to get to, but if that were the goal, that we want to make this so that standard zoning can be met, I think you're right, Commissioner Kuhn, that you'd have to go down to those minimums for every category to where the proposals we're getting, and then that you lose that opportunity then to have the type of discussion and some of the PUD give back when you do that. So
So the minimum lot area, that's the square footage of the parcel to the boundary lines on, wherever the meets and, like meets and bounds. And I'm not thinking in terms of a subdivision now. I'm thinking in terms of somebody has, they bought maybe 3 lots within the city limits back in 1971, and now they want to split it up and build new houses, similar to the houses that were built across from the fire station. So the 12,000 square feet, that would be to where they're going to subdivide this parcel and make each parcel 12,000 square feet, correct?
Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, yes, if they're not within a development that was granted a PUD that changed any of this, then yes, that's what the planning department looks at if someone comes forward with a minor subdivision is, okay, you've got no PUD, so you're in R1, you need to have 12,000 square foot lots, they need to be 80 feet wide, however many you can, whatever you can fit under those parameters, that's what you'll be able to do.
Okay, so they would need to be 80 feet wide,
12,000
but
square.
still 12,000 square feet. So then that pushes the lot depth beyond our minimum lot depth.
Deeper than, yeah.
Well, I mean, because if we, unless I'm missing something, if we multiply 80 by 130, then we have 10,400 square feet. So now we're talking,
Yep,
you do the very minimum, it's 10.4, but the 12,000 says you can't do that. You would then, if you're going to say the lot width is 80-foot minimum, then the depth of that lot has to increase by definition to get to the minimum 12,000 square feet. And is that what we want to do?
Yeah, Commissioner Vansky, that is a good point because that is something we deal with regularly. Is 80 times 130 is not 12,000, right? So that the explanation or the rationale of that is that that's the minimum, right? This is the minimum that you can be in any of these different areas, but you have to meet that 12,000 square feet. So if you're going to have an 80-foot wide lot, it's going to need to be deeper than 130, or if you're going to have a 130-foot deep lot, it's going to have to be wider than 80. And that has created some confusion before. We've had some questions about that. So there is potentially some validity to aligning the minimum square footage with what our minimum width and depths are, which I think, again, it's 10,000 something, right?
10.4
Yeah.
versus, so you wanted a minimum lot width of 80, you'd have 150 depth to a lot.
So
Like you're saying, if somebody has a 130-foot depth lot, well, now they got to make it
3 or 4.
93 or so feet wide to get to the 12,000.
we actually ran into this situation development-wide with the Madeline Trail development. When the Madeline Trail development initially came forward, we anticipated it was going to be a standard zoning development. We were kind of excited about that it was going to meet those. But they were doing 80 by 130 lots, and they couldn't meet the square footage minimum by doing that. So then it ended up coming through as a PUD and some additional changes to that. But yeah, so it's a valid point of discussion whether we want to consider amending something there to make the math cleaner.
I mean, you need flexibility. You have trees in the way, you have rivers, you have lakes, you're never gonna get a perfect grid of houses. So, when I say trees, we're trying to protect these, old trees as well. So that changes the dimensions of lots and can, hypothetically. So, there's just too many variables to have it hard and fast.
I think I'd like to look at it at the end of this when we go through the different zoning, just so we can again take a look back and say, now we're lining up R1 and and look at it all and go, okay, does this make sense? And does this drive people into the code that makes sense for the, with because it's hard without seeing the others, how it equates, I'd like to be able to look at them together. But we don't have to do that now. We could certainly do it once we get through the language.
And I'll just throw out there for general questions, like, would there be a disadvantage for us to shrink that down to 10.4 as the minimum square footage size? And, maybe bring down the minimum house size to 1,500. And maybe that makes your lives easier in terms of getting developers to come in and, here's a standard and you met it. Just keep in mind that we've squeaked these things down as tight as we can, and you're not going to get anything less than a 10-foot side yard setback. And then does that number then conflict with the density of how many units per acre? At 6 units per acre, do you start to,
They might be able to say, then they might come in and say, but I can fit 8 or 7.
Right,
That's what they'll do because they could.
right.
Because everything we take off makes another house.
I never claimed this would be easy.
No.
Myself as a principal, I kind of like the 1,800, but we can talk about it. And I think that's reasonable to do, and we, staff probably talks about it with just about every developer that comes in and says, well, here's what we're thinking. So, I think the market apparently supports that at the same time.
It's a lot easier to be hard and fast in these rules when you're an established community, because we're growing so much. You have to be somewhat flexible. I mean, like Edina, they can do this, right?
They don't have any land,
Right.
really.
That's exactly right.
Diana's having 5-foot side yard setbacks.
5?
Yes.
If the commission is agreeable, I think, to Commissioner Murray's suggestion, maybe we move through and talk some more about some of this other stuff, and then can recap at the end. And I've been taking notes so we know what we want to bring back to the next time we talk about this. So moving into those other principal uses. So again, as you may recall, we had some conflicting numbers and items with some of these bulk regulation tables. So really what we tried to do here is we eliminated what we had moved from principal use to conditional use, take them out of the table, and then trying to provide some consistency for some of these other facilities between zoning districts and within zoning districts related to those setbacks, impervious surface, et cetera. So, comparable front yard setbacks for these of 30 feet, a little bit deeper rear yard setbacks for these, much larger side yard setbacks between some of these other principal uses. More impervious surface because most of them do require parking lots if you're talking about a church or a school or something. So it makes sense that a more impervious surface would be needed. And then a slightly larger height from 35 to 40 for some of these structures.
So if we add a minimum acreage to the places of worship or the elementary, parochial, junior, then we would add them to the chart as well.
We would either add them into the chart or we would just note them within the language above. Yeah, it'd be one or the other. We'd look and see what made the most sense to how we present it, but. Any glaring questions, concerns related to the other principal uses?
So I just want to make sure I fully understand this. To Julie's point, what is the land size for, the minimum land size for municipal facilities and worship assembly?
Right now, there is not one. Our code does not have a minimum or a maximum of what size those
Do we not want that?
that was one of the questions that was that we talked about was, do we want to have a minimum size and a maximum size for things like schools, you know, a water treatment plant, those types of things. So I think what we as staff are going to do is pull some of that comparative data.
I will say, I think we need better language in that section, because when I was reading that, I was thinking land specific to cemeteries and memorial gardens, not to just land. I didn't read that the same way. It's just me, but, yeah. Maybe that's just me.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, places of worship and assembly. And maybe it needs including churches, cemeteries, and memorial gardens, or something to that extent.
Including the building or something.
Yep, because this is intended and as interpreted is the whole
Okay,
thing, not just the cemetery or the memorial garden portion.
yeah.
All right. So then again, you know, some of these items that had been permitted uses or are permitted uses in our current code that we are proposing moving to conditional uses, just creating that in its own separate section of the bulk regulations. Again, with the comparable setbacks as any of these other types of facilities, schools and municipal facilities. The other that was added to this, as we mentioned, is the detached accessory dwelling unit. Isaac had included some of this setback information, really more as placeholder based on some of the comparative setbacks that we've seen in other ordinances. So that is also open to discussion, but we are looking at 10-foot rear, 10-foot side. I think, if I'm looking at my tables right, yeah, 10-foot rear, 10-foot side, maximum height of 24 feet, and front yard of 45. And we can provide some comparative setback information, so we can kind of see what other folks are doing in those areas specifically in our next round. Moving on to accessory uses in R1, not a whole heck of a lot changed here other than some of the verbiage that we amended, storage shed and structure, eliminating greenhouses. And then, as you'll recall, we had this issue with our patio or detached deck being 5 feet when our standard easements are 6 feet. So wanting to get that cleaned up to be consistent with the other accessory structures. Any other questions on R1 before we move into R2? All right. So moving into section 24.2. So this one is a little unique. So as the commission may recall, prior to 2019, the city had an R2 residential district that allowed for single-family homes in the low-density areas, but was essentially a much reduced restriction zoning district for those single-family homes, and it ended up turning into a little bit of a dealer's choice, especially in our annexation area or non-zoned areas, of developers saying, well, yeah, we'll do this and we want R2 because we can do much smaller lots and smaller homes. So because of that, in June of 2019, prior to my arrival here, that was corrected and that was kind of taken off of the books, that you can't do these smaller single-family zoning districts, and R2 became basically a duplex district. That said, if you want duplexes, you can be R2. Since that has gone into place, there hasn't been anything that's been rezoned or zoned to R2, so it hasn't been in action since then. So what we're thinking about doing is, we obviously have R2 zoned properties today. There are some developments one or two of the Laketown developments, Lake Wasserman Woods, I believe, and maybe one more that were zoned under the pre-2019 R2 districts. So we want to retain the language in here that governs those existing R2 districts, but create it so that it's only to govern those existing R2 districts and essentially not allow anything else to be zoned R2 going forward. So that's kind of how we've written this in the purpose and scope, that this is an existing low to medium density district that's no longer available for new development or rezoning. And the existing zone districts include single-family homes. They also include some townhomes. One of the Laketown PUDs in R2 included some townhomes, just to further complicate the matter, just because why make it easy? So that's essentially the purpose and scope of this, is to, say, hey, we know we've got it, we got to govern it, but let's not use it again. So we've amended the principal use to include the existing principal use of single family and townhome dwellings. We did include the standard R1 principal uses of municipal facilities, places of worship, schools and golf courses, just again to, in the future, not necessarily limit those if in 40 years somebody comes in and there's a need for a school or something, you have that potential opportunity. Unlikely, but have that opportunity. And then for accessory uses, again, trying to, and we talked a little bit about this the last time we talked about this, just trying to pull out the different types of permitted accessory uses for single family homes and those for townhomes, because we have those two very distinct uses within this district. So allowing the single family homes to have those detached garages and storage sheds smaller than what we allow in R1. In R1 we allow 900 feet for those types of square feet for those types of structures. In R2, because they are smaller lots, there'd be a maximum of 600 square feet for those types of structures. And then for things like townhomes, permitting common building type structures, or athletic courts, those types of things. And then
Really quick question, though.
yeah,
At 600 square feet, is that have the potential for a de facto, no, you can't put this on here? Practically speaking, are we talking about then something just becoming a one-car garage? And
No, this would be only for accessory structures. So it would not impact an attached garage. It wouldn't limit, what you're able to do. It may potentially, if you wanted to have an attached garage, which the code would allow you can have an attached garage and a detached garage. Then you might be, that detached garage might need to be only one stall, depending on how much you can construct in 600 square feet. So that is a potential, but it wouldn't impact any of the attached garage space or limit that.
okay.
And then kind of jumping into conditional uses, again, similar to the R1, moving some of those permitted uses or previously permitted uses into a conditional use category for those districts. So before I move on to the bulk regulations, any questions, needed clarification on what at least from my deranged mind, we're trying to accomplish with that R2 district? All right. So moving to the principal uses, we retained the previous R2 single family home. This is what these were approved under, so retaining that as what those bulk regulations are for that district. And then again, same with the townhomes that are in that R2 district. We put in the actual regulations that those townhomes were approved under, so everything would be meeting these standards as part of that.
So they're 1,100 square foot lots and 1,000 square foot floor area? So there's only 100?
The way that most of these townhomes
That's
are,
tight.
yeah, and that most of these townhomes are platted, and you may recall with the recent Marsh Hollow development, is that the actual building itself, the property line is
Wall to wall?
almost wall to wall. There's just
Okay.
a little bit of space around it, which is why the townhomes in the Marsh Hollow development had a 95% impervious surface, because the actual townhome lot is basically just the building. And then your impervious surface and your other open spaces are those HOA outlots that surround these townhome buildings.
Makes sense.
And then again, similar to R1, just again adjusting those bulk regulation tables to be consistent with the rearranging of uses and making a consistent setback. So again, for R1, there had been a 25-foot total, 1 foot, 15 feet on each side setback. R2 had 35 feet each side, which I think was a typo, because that's a pretty big setback. That's a 70-foot side yard set between buildings. So that was really just adjusted to be consistent. And then same with conditional uses and our accessory uses. Again, there were some of these other that had the 5 feet in R2 that we'd want to amend to 6 feet for sides. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? What do we think that's a good approach? You'll see, when we jump into R3, we kind of took the townhome and incorporated that into the amended R3 district for medium density.
Makes sense.
Agree.
All right. So moving into R3, again, one of the things that we've talked about ad nauseum is that our current code does not provide, absent PUD, an opportunity to meet medium density. I should say absent PUD or absent townhomes, to meet a medium density designation in the code. So one of the things we wanted to do is try to create a medium density residential district. This is going to become more necessary, I think, and more in use as we continue to move into our growth area, because we do have a number of areas identified on our future land use map for medium density residential. So again, trying to tie our zoning to our comprehensive plan. So with that in mind, we did propose we rename this to a medium density residential district, updating that purpose and scope to indicate what we're trying to accomplish here: provide medium density single and multifamily residential areas together with those supporting public and semi-public features. In R3 allowing single family homes, duplexes, townhomes, row homes, small apartment buildings, or condominium complexes, to really provide a lot of different ways to get to medium density in these areas, and then tying it to the 6 to 12 units per acre that's noted in our comprehensive plan. So with this, as I alluded to up above, we'd be looking at providing multiple different types of principal uses within an R3 district to hit those R medium density standards. Single family homes as an option, duplexes and twin homes, townhomes, multifamily dwellings. We had talked about in our previous meeting that we thought in these higher density areas that some of these things like group homes or daycare facilities may make sense as a permitted use for an R3 type area. So we've included those group homes, the municipal facilities and city parks, churches, utility services, schools, daycare, etc. So a number of different potential options for principal uses within R3. With that, again, similar to the R2 where we've got both single family and townhome principal uses, we'd be looking at providing a little bit of separation between here are permitted accessory uses for a single family home or a duplex, the identical language as to what was included in the R2 district with the detached garage, storage shed, et cetera. And then a separate set of accessory uses for townhomes and multifamily dwellings geared more towards those common buildings, common facilities, common structures. And then moving into the conditional uses, we did include as a conditional use for single-family homes only, a detached accessory dwelling unit that would adhere to whatever we ultimately decide is our regulations for ADUs. Before we get into the bulk regulations on this, any questions, comments?
I have just a question. So under principal use, does it interest us at all to add an office building? Some kind of small, call it 5,000 square foot office building. Is that something that would make sense here, or is this not the right place?
Commissioner Moore, Chair, members of the commission, I really think it just depends on what we want to see happen, right? I mean, if you look back prior to a lot of cities adopting zoning codes such as this, it was pretty common to see some small commercial office mixed in residential areas. As zoning regulations kind of took hold across the country, that happened less and less. Things were kind of divided. I think it would be unique. I think it would be something a little outside the box. If you were to say, hey, we've got this, higher density area, and we're also going to allow the potential for some small or low impact commercial in these areas.
I only ask because you see a nursing home. When you think about,
If you look at like senior living, like Summerwood and Chanhassen, where they was slated for businesses underneath, like street side businesses that also supported the senior housing. I think there's some of that in Chaska down by is it Clover Ridge, where there's some businesses kind of across from the school there, or a little downtown type area that supports the neighbors, or I think, is that kind of what you're
it
thinking?
is. It is. However, that specific area is a different. It's not a residential district, so.
I don't know what. Yeah, it's a townhome. Well, there's townhomes down there across from Clover Ridge. Am I thinking Clover Ridge?
There, I know what you're talking about now. I've been thinking more like downtown Chaska. I don't know. It just, as far as impact on a community, a nursing home, a school, it kind of has the same design, and it could potentially have the same impact as far as how the streets function, how the resources it needs, the traffic it generates. If it doesn't make sense, that's fine. I think it's something we should just talk about. Trust me, I don't like weird wonky zoning. I like things to make sense. But if it's like on the periphery of something that's higher density, then I think it makes sense. So.
And I guess the other question, that kind of brings, I see it, Shakopee's doing a lot of it, where they're building first level businesses, apartments on top. I don't know where that fits into our zoning codes, and maybe it doesn't fit into any of these. Maybe it's something totally different. Would something like that, I'm thinking down on the south area, where you have some businesses and 3-story apartments or 2-story apartments, or.
Well, I guess if we didn't want it to be standalone, but we like the concept of, you have first floor, like small retail, like Dunkin' Donuts, Subway, kind of that, and then, maybe, a layer of townhomes above that, then maybe that piece of the equation works into an accessory use. So the principal use is to create
Right.
the housing units,
Residential.
and the accessory use of that property would be this lower level, low impact residential. As
Yeah.
opposed to like just standalone little,
Yes.
I mean, the thing that kind of brings my mind to that is that there's a little tiny corner in Southwest Minneapolis where there's just like one or two, like used to be like an old TV repair center, and now a salon, a restaurant, and then that just sits on the corner, and the rest of it's residential houses. And I think that maybe what you're driving at is that, you know, we have like this townhouse development that has like a cool 2-3 tiered townhouse, but the first floor beneath that would be residential,
Potentially.
or retail rather. Or,
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I guess it just depends. I'm thinking more of dense, like truly like where you have apartments, right? I mean, this is a zoning where you could have apartments. And so if there's more services and property that can accommodate all these people in a close proximity, that does qualify an office building. So
is that R4 that we're then talking about at that point, or are we sort of having a blurred area?
Yeah,
I was thinking it might be interesting to look at the comp plan where this R3 exists, because there may be a commercial districts adjacent, like that's the whole, like, because the idea is if people are living there, it'd be nice to have some services, but it depends on, and they could always bring it back and try to change the zoning, but maybe it's already there. I haven't studied that enough.
Yeah, commissioners, just a little bit of context. So right now, the CBD, which we are sitting in right now, allows for that type of mixed-use development. So that's really the only zoning district that allows for residential mixed with commercial. Our south growth area has, the comp plan itself has identified, you know, some high density residential, it's identified some commercial, but then in that small area plan that was conducted, it further refined that to again include some mixed use type development, I think comparable to what we're talking about here. As we've discussed previously, we are likely going to need to create a new zoning district, some sort of mixed use, commercial, high density something as we get into development down there, because that's not going to necessarily, everything's not going to fit neatly into high density, and we probably are not going to want to use central business district zoning for that area. So I think that will likely get accomplished in some of those areas that are guided for that, you know, the where when you look at the comp plan map and you see the mishmash of the high density and the commercial, that's where I think you've got the opportunity to do some of that mixed use. Here specifically, we're talking about R3, which does allow for some smaller apartments as well, you know, anything from single family, smaller single family up to smaller apartments. And again, me personally, I think that's an interesting idea to consider, whether it's through accessory use or conditional use permit to potentially allow some quasi low impact commercial in those areas. You know, I don't think that's totally crazy. I think it's kind of interesting to think about and would be something kind of unique, so.
I think it is, and certainly in Southern California, in some of the brand-new areas in Southern California, excuse me, there's actually a lot of that, while, and they're smaller downtown areas. But Chicago is probably a prime example of an area in brand-new developments where there's these little mini downtowns. And, I mean, they're just kind of springing up all over.
Are these in more suburban communities or more
Suburban,
urban?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, outlying, you know, kind of in Chicago about, 10th ring out
Yeah.
type situation. And it's really, I mean, it's really very nice. It's very, very convenient. And it appears to be a takeoff of the inner city. The inner city neighborhoods where, you go $3 for milk and bread, you know? And then above the store is, you know, is 4 apartments or whatever it may be. So I think while we're doing it, and, you know, I mean, you know, the trend's already here, it would appear.
It's the orange,
So, you know, putting some verbiage in
so I just couldn't see it at the bottom.
that would seem to make sense. Do you see it that way, Christian?
I see the areas with apartments and businesses as being a central business district, but
I feel personally that if somebody wants to do commercial in a residential district, I would prefer that come to us as I don't want to put it in as, you know, I don't feel as good about it's an allowed use. I think it's something that we want to regulate a little closer because it's so close to residential. But I think it makes sense to come here. And not meaning that it won't get done, not meaning that the right development couldn't pass here and make sense, but I just think it is something that it makes sense to come through planning commission and council because it doesn't really fall into
Yeah.
a residential use.
So maybe it's conditional use. Yeah.
the only thing I can think of locally that sounds something like what you're describing would be Cottagewood, where it's basically an R1 community and then there's a little thrift shop or I've never been there. But there's just a little shop that's probably 1,500 square feet where you can go in and buy some of your.
The old general store down there.
Yeah, it's like a general store. Is it still there? I mean, I've lived here forever, so I can't remember if it's still there. I've gone by it.
Even you look into Edina and you know, there's 50th in France. There's, you know, you go off of Penn and Xerxes. There's little neighborhoods, little downtowns throughout.
Many
Edina.
downtowns.
I don't know if that's what we're looking for here.
It's not the same community. I mean, it's not the same. It's not apples to apples.
No.
It's not.
No, and that's, but I think, I mean, like you're talking down in that southwest corner.
Yep.
I think that's where, like, the orange on there is the R3.
Yeah, orange is medium density residential. So these are these areas I noted that we've identified that we've got a pretty large area, kind of in that south growth area, that's guided for medium density. Yeah, so that is medium, brown is high, red is commercial, the purple is kind of flex employment. And yeah. And
I mean,
then
is that what you're talking about? Like throwing a gas station next to the 3 apartment complexes or something smaller or just?
I think, like Chair Iverson, I somewhat know what he's talking about. There's the, when he references Chicago in 10th ring, my in-laws used to live out that way, and I have family out that way, that along a formerly used rail line that was used for hauling, you know, similar, not dissimilar to the rail line that's running through and crossing County Road 11, that they converted that to a passenger rail, and then along that rail line, then subdivisions started springing up where people could walk to their train station, and in the process of walking, they would be able to have, you know, like 3 or 4 stores where they could get coffee, or they could drop off their dry cleaning, or they could get, you know, just small groceries without then having to travel, you know, however many miles it takes to get to, you know, what they would determine civilization. And I can see in some of this development area out there, if that ever happened, where something exactly like that could fit in and have this sort of like mixed density. You'd have townhouses surrounding the small stores, and then you'd have the smaller, almost zero lot line, single family, smaller square footage, more affordable, and then it brings out from a larger, bigger lots, more square foot. And it's an attractive development, and it would dovetail in nicely with where we would have what is now farmland developed into a multi-use structure.
So I think you kind of nailed it earlier when you said you're gonna have to create a new zoning district for this area down south, because this is gonna be a nightmare for you guys if you try to implement this in this area, where you've got a blend of the high density adjacent to the commercial. Where I see a challenge is where you see on this map where you've got the high density residential right up to the flex employment. So as this is done right now, that does not allow for any type of retail. It does not allow for any type of service retail or office, or, I mean, flex employment, you're gonna expect jobs, lots of jobs. I mean, that's the goal of that type of zoning, right? So, it doesn't provide flexibility. So that's,
Commercial, right, adjacent to that? Because that's the dark red.
Yeah,
so,
I think,
no, so, so
you're talking about this area right
I
here,
am,
right?
yeah. So the goal, just because I know, because I've been on the Victoria Works, board or whatever, committee. The idea of this commercial district here that's in the Burgundy is, this is ideally industrial. I mean, there might be, correct me if I'm wrong, Marty, please, but retail, I don't think retail is this is gonna be heavy retail. I do think it's gonna be a lot of like your gas station and some service providers, not where the arrow is, but to the north where the Burgundy is, up here. Yep,
More highway type development.
yes, and that's because of access,
Yeah.
unless something's changed.
Yeah, Commissioner Moore, Chair, members of the commission, I think you're not inaccurate that with the small area plan, that's kind of what was identified as, if you want this to develop now, right, as infrastructure gets here, that's probably the type of development that you're gonna get. I know, and I can say pretty confidently that I think the council would like to try to see some higher or better type of commercial development in that area. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of things that need to happen for something like that to happen. So I think the council's vision of this would be for this area to be more of a higher retail type area, with the south of 10 kind of being more of that industrial type development. But
You already have a church down there.
yeah, there's a couple churches down there. Yep.
I think it'd be lovely, but I just think access is gonna be tricky. I don't wanna, this is a tangent, but anyway, all right.
But yes, we will certainly, regardless of what happens, we're going to need a new commercial mixed-use type zoning district or districts once we start development down in that area. All right, where were we? Okay, hold on. Okay.
But that's very rural, or,
Yep. So, talking about principal uses, again, getting into the accessory uses, some of the providing the differences between the single family and duplex for townhome and multifamily, conditional uses. Okay, we were at bulk regulations. I'm caught up now. So, for purposes of this document, essentially what I did was utilized the previous single-family R2 regulations, the current R2 duplex regulations, and then our existing R3 townhome and multifamily regulations. So those are the numbers that you're seeing for each of those and where they kind of generated. This single family was the again, the old R2. This was the current duplex regulations, and then this is what is currently within R3 for townhomes and multifamily. As I noted earlier, the one thing that we did propose changing, I think requires some discussion, is instead of having a minimum finished floor area, especially if we are, we're seeking to get to denser uses and we don't just want big houses on small lots to get to that dense use, potentially considering including a maximum finished floor area per unit for those single-family homes only. You'd see that that's NA when you get into duplexes and townhomes and multifamilies, but it is potentially a way to, another way to help get away from that dealer's choice mentality with a developer. You would only be able to use R3 if you're building in a guided medium density area, and B, if you want to build single family homes in R3, they've got to be smaller homes. So that's kind of the method to the madness of the thought process behind implementing something like that. 1,200 square foot is a placeholder number of what that is, but thoughts on that as a concept?
I do like the defined standards. You know, I think that's the easy way to do it, the good way to do it.
From a concept perspective on that, does that make sense to think about doing something like that? Putting a max on how big those houses can get when you're in those denser areas?
It does. I'm just trying to think through where the math works on that number. So if you have 7,500 square feet, then you need to think about, you know, what's our percentage of impervious space? Then, you know, keep subtracting and subtracting till you have like how much is left over that the dwelling can be, and maybe you arrive at the dwelling size for the maximum square footage based on that. And if that doesn't seem like it's practical, then, you know, make adjustments, like maybe we alter the impervious square feet so that that becomes smaller, so that you have more space left over in that parcel.
All right, and Commissioner Vansky, chair, members of the commission, absolutely. I think that that's a good idea to try and, versus, picking a number out of the air, which essentially, admittedly, is what I did for this one. We try to
To get something started, sure.
try to mathematically determine what that should be. Similar with the lot sizes too. I mean, we've kind of got an idea of are you going to hit those densities as what's called out in the comp plan, but we haven't sat down and actually run the math on that. So we want to just make sure that you can actually get to those densities with whatever we're saying or minimum lot sizes. Otherwise, this is all kind of a moot point if you can't hit your medium density with some of those things. So that's another note I've added to my list, is we'll try to calculate some of that out and get to that. In general, again, this concept of kind of providing a more flexible, with parameters, but a more flexible medium density residential district, does that seem to make some sense?
I think it does.
Seems to be in agreement.
I just had a quick question for you. Do we have something in the city's charter that mandates the production of the comprehensive plan?
So Victoria, I do not believe, is a charter city, so we don't necessarily have a charter. But the comprehensive plan is required by the Met Council of every city and county within the 7-state or 7-county metropolitan area. So that's kind of where the mandate of having a comprehensive plan goes.
I'm just thinking about a potential situation where you incorporate the comprehensive plan by reference, and that becomes part of our ordinance. But what if we have a council that in the future decides we don't want a comprehensive plan any longer, and they just, for lack of a better expression, annul the concept, and we don't have it. So now you have an ordinance that's broken de facto by a maneuver that a future council might take.
The Met Council would be very unhappy about that if that situation were to take place. They do hold some teeth. The Met Council does hold some teeth with that. So related to connections to the Met sewer system, the Shores of Marsh Lake development, for example, if you'll recall, we had to do kind of a last minute comp plan amendment just because that property wasn't included in the comp plan for 2020 to 2030 development. It was included 2030 to 2040, and it was literally one sentence in one chart. But we had to do a comp plan amendment to move it to 2020 to 2030. Otherwise, they weren't going to authorize sewer connection permits for that. So there are some teeth from the Met Council side. So I think the risk of a council saying we're no longer going to have a comp plan is pretty low. Councils can ask to amend comp plans and change comp plans and do all kinds of stuff like that, depending on prerogatives of different areas. But to completely eliminate, I think it'd be a pretty difficult thing to do.
Okay, thanks.
So we've got the bulk regs then again with those other principal uses. These were again amended to be consistent with our other areas, so that when we're talking churches, we're talking schools, we're looking at the same regulations, regardless of the zoning district that they find themselves to be in. And then in this area, the only conditional use that would have setback and height requirements would be those detached accessory dwelling units, and again, only applicable to single-family homes. And then same with our accessory uses for R3. Again, these are all consistent across the similar uses in different districts for setbacks. Any other questions with R3 before we move on to R4? We're almost done, promise.
We're up to 4.
So R4, there weren't a ton of major proposed amendments in here. Like all of the other districts, we did provide some edited language to tie this to the comp plan. So in our comp plan, high density is defined as 12 to 36 units per acre. So including that in here. The principal uses currently in our R4 district are townhomes and multifamily dwellings, apartment buildings. I guess just as back up just a minute, you probably saw the row homes being deleted in some of these. That's because with the amended definition for townhome in the definition section, we just included that just to not have to make a distinction between the two.
Are you excluding row homes?
No, we essentially amended the definition of townhome because a townhome and a row home are very comparable and in some cases interchangeable, the language. We just amended the definition to townhome to also encompass a row home.
Okay, because you got row home on page 17. Or page 27 there, top of the page.
On which page, sorry?
Right there, top of that page, where it says district, townhome, row homes, duplexes. Because you're,
Oh, yep, yeah, so that reference should get struck, yeah, just because
and
for definition purposes, townhome and row home is the same thing.
well, and then the other side is, I mean, it's just detail, but you're calling duplexes / twin homes on that same sentence. You just got duplexes and not twin homes.
These are the things that we like to catch now versus we come back to them in 5 years and say, oh, Marty screwed that up.
I think that's, I mean, you could do a search on your document for row homes.
Yeah, and we haven't gotten to QC on the actual language yet. We absolutely will do. So my apologies for any other typos or other things you are very likely to find in there. All So jumping back down to R4, again, these are similar other principal uses for as R3. The one that is not included currently on this list, again, I don't know if we have a strong opinion for or not. It was not included as a principal use previously in R4, but our schools, if we think that, I know we had a little bit of discussion on that in our previous meeting as to whether or not R4 high density areas is really an appropriate location or zoning district for schools, or if they should be in those other R1 through R3. I don't know that I have a specific opinion on that at this point in time, so I don't know if any of the other commissioners have a thought on that.
And I think they're fine to put them in there for consistency purposes and just, have some thought around, structurally, will they work? Are there enough parking spaces? And this is, for not only people who, are going to, visitors dropping off, but teachers and, other support staff. But while I'm looking at our quest to have some consistency for like places of worship and have them the same in all of the zones, I'd like us to be very cautious on the at least X acres in size and do some homework about what could the smallest possible number for that be, and set it low so that we don't run into a situation where somebody says, you have violated my rights under the Constitution of Worship and Assembly by putting a minimum lot size. I could never have a mosque here because you guys deliberately set it at X that would say, I can't worship here, or I can't have that accessible to me because this is what you targeted. I'd like us to be able to stay very vigilant and make sure that it works.
Yeah, and Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, good point, and agree. There's also an option of not including a minimum lot size for these types of things. I think the chicken and the egg with that is, if you're trying to, especially in R1, and maybe it's not as important in some of the, the higher density areas, but, do you want to get into a situation where a single family residence is converted into a place of worship, and this is a church now, and I'm going to have 75 people parked out front every week, and that's kind of the thought process behind why we may want to consider that, but there isn't currently a minimum square footage for those types of uses, and that doesn't have to be going forward either. So just some additional point to noodle on. So moving into permitted accessory uses, again, this is very comparable, if not identical, should be identical, will be identical in the final version of the apartment accessory uses in R3. Again, mostly focused toward those common buildings and structures. And then as far as conditional uses, we would not allow accessory dwelling units in this district because this district does only allow townhomes and apartment buildings. Detached accessory dwelling units because they only allow townhomes and apartment buildings. And the bulk regulations for those townhomes and multifamily, this is unchanged from what is currently within the code. The townhome minimum regulations is consistent across this and R3 as well as R2 for the existing townhomes. The multifamily does increase the number of units and stories allowed currently, and as presented here between R4 and R3. So it's purposely denoting you can have smaller apartments in R3, but you can't necessarily have the 100-unit 4-story apartments in R3. And then again, we pulled in those other principal uses and made the tables consistent among the other zoning districts. Same with accessory uses. Any questions on R4 before we move into our last one, Lake Minnetonka Residential District? Aren't you all glad that we didn't do this in addition to everything else we did at the last meeting?
Yes.
That was a good call.
I have just a quick question, and this is for Julie. So the senior,
Yep, we're on the same page.
okay, so I believe the R4 is gonna include some senior housing. I hope it does at least. And so I wanna make sure that the density covers that type of use with the amount of units and the right setbacks. So I think, Julie, you'd be an expert on this.
Well, that's one of the things I was kind of sitting here. We have senior housing in every zone. And what we don't want to happen is that, because senior housing, they're having to put these big footprints and they're having to go 4 stories and they're very high, you know, they're not able to do like Mount Olivet, which is a single story structure or even 2-story anymore. So I think we want some protection against, or that we get some say on like how that fits into the different districts. Cause I could see, you know, a school, you're probably gonna have 1 story, maybe 2. I've not seen a lot of 3-story schools, you know, but I think that your senior housing, like I could come with a senior housing development that would be 5 stories. And right now I don't know that we have any protection against that. So I think we might think about that because that doesn't, you know, that's gonna be, not that we don't necessarily not want that in a residential district, but we're gonna, like, if it's next to a house and you're looking at a 5-story, you know, development right next to you, it's not gonna feel really good.
Right.
Commissioner
And
Murray.
maybe there's something there I'm missing. There
Yeah,
could be.
Chair, members of the commission. So we do have for both multifamily, and the, you know,
Maximum
you
height.
get to nursing home and care retirement community, we do have maximum height. So
5 feet would be 4 stories? 12 foot per story?
yeah, approximately, right? I think that's
So
right.
is that okay? I guess that's the question. Is that okay in an R1, R2 district?
And just as a reminder, in R1 and R2, that type of facility would be
Yeah,
a
conditional
conditional
use.
use, which would require that to go through and have those, you know, analyses made by both this group and the city council. Whereas it would only be a permitted use in R3 and R4, where you're going to see potentially some of those larger structures. So.
Right, we have a 4-story structure, I think it's 4, that's over by the baseball diamonds next to the pavilion.
Bethesda.
3 stories.
Is that 3 or 4 that's over there?
I think it's 3.
I think it's 3.
I know it's 3. I've been toward it. I'm like 90% sure. Has a garage underground, but it's 3 above.
And that property is zoned R3 as well. So it would be consistent with what we're talking about here, where you might potentially see some of those.
When we had that come through, did we have a lot of public comment and a lot of dissension, or was it well received? Because I didn't see those
Yeah,
meetings.
Commissioner Murray, chair, members of the commission, that was prior to my time too, when that all got approved.
It actually was fairly well received. There was a facility already there.
No.
I don't remember what was.
Yeah, there was a facility there. It was very low, single
They were like
story.
single-family homes.
No, they were almost like a quad or a duplex.
Okay, more duplex,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Never been back
I mean,
there.
my wife and I know the people that live on just the other side of it, and
They're fine.
they don't seem to have any objection. Now, there was a fair amount of arborvitaes, and
Well,
They
and
were
one
generally-
side
Pardon?
faces the baseball field.
Pardon?
So the one entire side of the building is on the baseball field. So
Right.
it's really only, and they buffered the property with the villas in the front
correct.
so that they're really only buffering their own villas. So that was a situation where they kind of were mindful. That's true.
Yeah,
But you have a friend right there that's,
Yeah, they're sandwiched between the walking path that comes between, there's a series of duplexes that are on the south side of that walking path and on the north side. I have my directions right. So they would be, there's probably about 4 homes that are parceled up between the walking path north to, I'm trying to remember what street is that, 80th over there, 80.
it's on the east side of the property.
These will be on the east side of, east of where this, the property where the 3-story structure is, so.
I know what you're talking about.
Commissioners, that was my understanding too. Again, I wasn't here when this development came through, but I've understood that it had its standard amount of people concerned about traffic and noise and those types of things. But in my time here, I've personally not received any complaints about it.
I think it fits in the community well where it is. I don't think it's a problem, but it is 3 stories, not 5 or, 4s, I think.
Yeah,
And I guess that would be my question, is that 55-foot height where we would like to keep it, or is it a different number? I don't know that. I'm just bringing it up because I could just see it.
That is 4 stories,
Is it?
I would think.
Well, 55 is, but I thought you were saying that.
Yeah, and again, just to kind of circle back on this. So again, the 55 feet is in the R4 district, which again, just by its nature, is going to be the high density.
And the 45.
And I think it is, I believe we have 45 currently in the R3 district for those. Yeah, so 45.
45.
So
So we do limit it.
Smaller
You'll be 3 stories at 45.
3,
in the R3 district, and then as you get into those high density, you're allowed.
Depending on your ceiling heights, it'd be tight.
All right, last one. So Lake Minnetonka Residential District. This is kind of a unique district, just that it's a very small area along Lake Minnetonka that has its own zoning district. I'd be very interested if anyone knows the history on how that came to be, because I don't, and I'm just curious to know how that came to be anyway, for another day. But essentially what we're trying to do here is, again, tie the purpose and scope. This is a low-density residential district, so tying it to the comp plan for low-density residential. The jurisdiction, again, this is in a shoreline district. Every property in this district is in a shoreline district, so we did include some notes that you're also have to, these shoreline requirements apply, and then in the event of any conflicting provisions, the more restrictive provision shall prevail, just in case we've got some confliction between. We've tried to make sure we don't, but in case you do end up in a situation where things are conflicting. So a couple of potential changes to the principal uses. We did, like R1, move the group home facility, residential facility, into a conditional use. We did not add municipal facilities. It was there. I just kind of reordered this to be in line with everything else and added and parks. And then again, our places of worship. Tried to include the language that was used in the other areas, and we'll continue to have discussion about the size of those if we want to have a minimum size. So nothing changing in the permitted uses of LMR outside of removing the residential facility group home and putting it into a conditional use versus permitted. Permitted accessory uses, so again, a little bit of potential editing here, just for language purposes. Again, changing storage shed for domestic supplies to storage shed or structures. We did include a water-oriented accessory structure in adherence with section 22, which is the shoreland ordinance for any of those riparian. I think that probably needs to be amended to say for riparian properties, because that's only applicable to those.
So would this be considered something along the lines of a boat, Marty?
Yeah, Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, that is, the shoreland ordinance allows a riparian property to have one water-oriented structure like a boathouse. They're limited in size. They're supposed to be screened. There's a number of requirements within the shoreland ordinance, but allows it to be within 10 feet of the ordinary high water line, where the normal ordinary high water line setback is much greater than that.
Did we determine no plumbing?
Yes, I believe so, that they can't, I think that was included, that
Thought
they
we
can't
did.
include plumbing, sinks and bathrooms, because you don't want them to turn into an accessory dwelling unit that close to the water line.
Now, would this be something that we would want as an accessory use, or would we want to move this to a conditional use so that you can get some visibility around what's being done? That there seems to be some oversight on what's going up before it gets built, so that it blends in with surroundings and people have the ability to make public comment and things like that.
Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, so a water-oriented accessory structure is a permitted accessory use in the shoreland ordinance for all shoreland areas. So if we were to want to make that a conditional use, either specifically here or in that, if we were to only do it here, it would be a more restrictive requirement for the LMR versus someone who may have a riparian lot in an R1 district, because the shoreland ordinance allows it to be a permitted accessory use. I think, and we can go back and pull that information up the next time we bring this forward and just review what the regulations are for those structures. I think they are pretty sound, and they're pretty, they don't allow for something that's going to cause a lot of issues to be put up. So I don't know that there'd be a necessity to make that a conditional use, but we can certainly look at it again.
Just throwing it out there so that we, have consistency, and we have, eyes on the things that probably tend to get people hot and bothered about things. There are those always seem to have some level of contention about, I like the shoreland, I don't want something that's constructed out of, essentially what was formerly rubble or boulders.
And they are, I want to say, they're very small structures. I think the shoreline ordinance only allows them to be 250 square feet, I think.
Okay, so, got it.
So, the majority of people that are doing that, they're sheds for water-related stuff is what they end up being. So moving down that list,
Just another housekeeping thing. Item 5 there, you're saying athletic courts and tennis courts, different places throughout this ordinance. Someplace has athletic courts and tennis courts, someplace just says athletic courts. I think you just
Which is all inclusive.
I think you just drop tennis courts out of everything and just say athletic courts, which would be more inclusive, and just drop the tennis courts out of it. Because you're mixing it back and forth, but again, it's just a
no, I
housekeeping.
yeah, I appreciate that. The intent was the areas that you saw tennis court removed. That was what I was trying to do, and obviously I've missed some of those references. So again, I'd much rather deal with these types of things at this point than when we've got an ordinance amended and we find those inconsistencies again. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. So again, comparable to the permitted accessory uses in R1, allowing home occupations that adhere to the new regulations that we as a group will put in place. An attached accessory dwelling unit, same as R1, the temporary buildings for construction, and then solar collectors. So those are all items that are permitted accessory uses in R1 that seem to be applicable or would also be appropriate in the LMR as accessory uses. Conditional uses, we did add a detached accessory dwelling unit in adherence with the code. That one may require some additional conversation if we do think we want to potentially allow, even as a conditional use, detached ADUs in the LMR district. The shoreland ordinance does allow for them, again, with some additional restrictions for a shoreland district. But again, just for purposes of this and the inconsistency, I did include it, but certainly can have some discussion about that. And then moving the group homes and using the consistent language down to a conditional use.
Is this shoreline district everything that's essentially north of 7?
Yeah, I can pull up my map again, so I can show you exactly where it is. It is not all of the property north of 7, so it's the orange area here.
Okay.
Is considered LMR. So only those properties that were along Lake Minnetonka, and then those between Lake Minnetonka and 7, these that don't border Lake Minnetonka on the east side are R1.
R1. Okay.
They'd be within a shoreline district, right? We've got a lot of properties in our city that are PUD, R1, R2, R3 that have that shoreland overlay, and those apply, but every property in the LMR is in a shoreline district.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time to ask, but there is a residence in this R1 area that has a dumpster in front of their house. And how is that to be? They don't,
Always.
it's constantly there.
Keith's taking notes.
You probably know the house.
Do you know where it is?
It's a commercial dumpster. Oh yeah, you can see it right at the intersection
Right
of
at
Highway 7 and Rolling Acres.
And 7 on the northwest side of the street.
Yep. And it does back up to that.
You can go, yeah.
And not the two commercial, as you're facing north of Rolling Acres, as you look northwest.
Are they commercial? They may be considered commercial, that's probably why.
Is it commercial?
Are there the two green ones side by side that you look at as you're sitting at the red light? Or is
If
there?
you're going west, it is immediately to the right, yes.
I've never noticed those.
I didn't know any of that was commercial. Are those commercial right there?
So,
I'm just talking about what kind of dumpsters that they are.
so
Oh.
if you
They
move-
look like they were.
if you move your, I can tell you exactly.
Which one of those lots?
I'm gonna make one suggestion. Can we take this offline?
Yes.
You and Keith connect after the
Yep.
meeting. That would be great. Just don't want to get too far off base.
Unfortunately, I have a tendency to tangent. Right here.
Okay. I promised you I was almost done, so let me get back to where it was. And then, again, not proposing any changes to any of the lot regulations. You'll recall we reviewed these when we reviewed the shoreland ordinance, the lot regulations in LMR. So those were recently reviewed for riparian and non-riparian lots and are in line with what the shoreland ordinance requires. And then moving again, for consistency, those other principal uses and conditional uses, using the similar front rear and side yard setbacks. The caveat, or the change that's a little different than the other zoning districts is the maximum impervious surface for any of these uses being 25%. Again, that is a requirement of the shoreland ordinance that any use, any parcel to have a maximum impervious surface of 25%. So if we were to have a different standard within this code language, we would have a conflicting standard within the shoreland ordinance. So amending these to be 25%. And then just kind of as a note here, if we do ultimately determine we think detached accessory dwelling units can be a conditional use, that their impervious surface would count towards the total 25. The 25% would be the max between the principal and accessory unit. And then again, same list here as we have in R1 for accessory uses with those same setbacks and heights. And that's everything.
Nice job.
Questions, comments, concerns?
Anything
Criticisms.
additional on it? And are we genuine or generally in agreement on the content?
Yeah, I think,
I feel that we are.
yeah.
X to be defined?
The land size, right, yeah. And if we could change that wording just so it's just a little more clear.
Well, Marty, you still
Moving
need to bring the,
including.
you still need to bring forward what we discussed at our last meeting to
Yeah.
an overall
Or
draft
it has to
document,
come
correct?
back for-
Yep, Commissioner Vansky, chair members of the commission, I think how we're planning to tackle this moving forward, Isaac and I talked about it a little bit last week. We wanted to get through this piece before we kind of started doing some of the amendments and stuff we talked about the last meeting. So now that we've done that, we'll go back the whole thing and kind of take the feedback, the suggestions, we'll make some more notes, we'll pull some of that additional information, and we'll bring this whole section back again at a future date to talk about. We do at some point in a future meeting, we will also want to kind of hammer into the PUD ordinance section. I know we reviewed it when we did our overview sessions, but we haven't gotten into that kind of more detail level. So that's another meeting we will have in the future. And then we'll hopefully get to a point where we can kind of bring the whole thing back and here's what we talked about, here's what it is. And then we'll ultimately have to hold a public hearing when we get to that point for an ordinance amendment. We will probably have some point in between there, a workshop with the city council, just to update them when we feel like we're pretty comfortable where we're at, make sure they're all on the same page. If they have questions that need to come back to us, we can bring it back for another session. So long answer to your short question, yes, this will come back to see revisions.
Anything else on that topic? To come up again in the near future. We'll close that item out. I would like to have Marty go first on this with his comments, some of his statements, just so that we don't repeat each other. Because we
moving to miscellaneous?
miscellaneous. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a few miscellaneous items from staff. First, congratulations to John Iverson, Christian Pedersen, and Jarrett Kuhn, who were reappointed last night for 3-year terms on the commission. So we're glad to have them now. What's that put you now till 2025? So I'm glad to have you. Also, congratulations and welcome to Eric Ream. He was appointed as Planning Commission alternate number 1 by the council last night, so he will be officially joining us as an alternate as of our April 5th meeting. And then I did mention that, sorry, had that note twice. So congratulations and welcome to everybody. Reminder that April 5th meeting will be our annual meeting, so we'll be appointing our chair and vice chair for the next year at that meeting. I don't think we will do the orientation session as a group, again, just because we've done it a couple of times with this group. And the LMC just recently did a very comparable training. I sent the link out to folks. So we will hold an orientation with Eric, but I don't think I'll subject you to us going over that information again on the 5th. Planning Commission is invited to join a joint workshop on Monday, March 14th at 5:30 p.m. with the City Council. That workshop is going to be to participate in discussions about a proposed outdoor recreation and shooting sports complex in the city's South Growth area. So I would encourage everyone that is able to attend. Because I don't want you to have to go to back-to-back meetings, we will also cancel our Tuesday, the 15th Planning Commission meeting. So we do not have any active business outside of our ordinance review that would have been on the agenda. So we will cancel the meeting on the 15th and hope that you can make it to the joint work session on the 14th. And that's all I have, Chair.
Superb. We did have a quorum last night. There was 4 of us here at the Planning Commission, Laura, Jared, Christian, and myself. So whatever that means.
When was that?
I left.
I wasn't here.
Last night
I was here for the workshop. I didn't go to the council
for
meeting.
the workshop, last night.
There was just the 3 of us.
I was there.
Laura
when
was
I
here.
left. I left early because I was like, well, you guys have it covered.
Were you at the workshop?
Well, I came at 6:30.
Yep. Portion.
What time is the workshop?
Workshop was over by
Yeah.
6:15.
Just to publicly clarify, we did not have an unnoticed quorum, I don't believe, at the meeting last night. We had 3 planning commissioners who were noticed to be at the workshop for commission interviews, and then Commissioner Moore did come to the regular meeting after other commissioners had left. So
And we'll leave it at that. One of the other things that was discussed at the workshop is that there is now 5 precincts in Victoria. That precinct 3 was subdivided, and it's now 3 and 4. And then there is 5, which is further south. Precinct 1 didn't change. Precinct 2 didn't change. And so that's a 10-year plan for that. At the city council meeting, one of the issues was the fire and sheriff's report, and there was some discrepancies in call count and the amount that Victoria is being billed by Carver County at the same time. And that was a detail that just had to be sorted out. There was a sketch plan review of the Simon property through Loomis. And so they had went through last night, what we had covered the previous Tuesday, and had some of the same questions, some of the same concerns. And so the gentleman from Simon Property spoke on that at the same time. So it's now on to the next phase for that. Some of the things that were discussed in there was setback dimensions, cost of, and then the cost of the road connecting to Marsh Lake Road, and then who pays for that. And there is an agreement with the city on how that'll all work. And one of the, what I think is a great thing, is that Victoria had received a certificate for its excellent financial management. And there's some process that someone goes through to award that. So that was pretty neat, that it's being monitored very closely, and so, and then the meeting was adjourned. So, Commissioners, any other issues, concerns, thoughts?
I just have a question. So what's the background on just one alternate for Planning Commission?
Commissioner Moore, Chair, members of the commission, we had 5 applicants originally, so we were hopeful we were going to be able to fill that second alternate spot. Unfortunately, due to some personal circumstances, that person withdrew before interviews, the 5th person. So we only had 4 applicants for the 5 open spaces. We are intending to keep that rolling open. We will probably in the next few weeks to a month do another blast and say, hey, we've still got an available alternate position, and try to get another applicant. But we'd love to have 2 alternates. We just didn't have the applicant pool to get to at this time.
Okay.
So the two, what I guess would now be former alternates, they're no longer involved?
Commissioner, Chair, members of the commission, that is correct. We had been notified by alternate Nebben a few months back that he wasn't going to be able to continue to attend. And rather than having that, a resignation accepted and going through that process, we were close enough to the time when recruitment was going to be happening. So we just kind of let his term expire. And then I believe that Commissioner Elliott has also stepped back as well. He did not reapply to be an alternate this time around, or any of the open positions, so.
Very good. Anything else? Hearing nothing else, I would call for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
A second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.